Hey, hey, and welcome back to Night Shift with Andréa Up Late. As always, or as usually, I am joined by my co-host BC Sanders, also host of the Disruptors podcast with BC and Ski. How you doing, BC?
As always, wonderful.
Well, it's
Just
good to have you.
wonderful.
It's good to have you. We've already got a couple friends in the chats.
Yeah.
Hey guys, so if you haven't listened to this show, we are a live YouTube channel that drops as a podcast wherever you stream your podcasts. So you can watch us live every Tuesday night at 8/7 Central on the Andréa Up Late YouTube channel. And then, like I said, about usually the next day, we'll drop the show as a podcast and you can stream it wherever you prefer there. If you do choose to go that route, please do me a favor and like or rate, review, hit all the stars, hit 1 star. It really doesn't much matter, but do all the things and it's really, really helpful. So in saying that, we have some friends in the chats and we usually will address them a little bit at the beginning and then sometimes throughout the show if there are questions pertaining to the case at hand. So if you hear us calling out names, that's what we're doing. So we've got John and Abby, Davey, we got Brittany, we got a lot of our buddies in the chat. So if you've not listened, you're welcome to hop on, log into YouTube. It's all free, all that good stuff. And you can join in the chats as well and give us your input and all these kinds of things. So I think we should start to get into the case, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Since I don't know anything about it yet.
Yeah, what do you know? Do you know anything about this case, BC?
No, the last few times I've kind of gotten a hint and told me that's not going to happen again. So
I'm not sure I said it quite.
No, you didn't. But no, I don't know. I don't know anything other than I think you have mentioned a mother was involved. And a child.
Yes. Yeah. It just depends on if you remember. I have covered this case once before on season 2 of Night Shift. I am going over a lot of the cases I've covered prior to see. Sometimes there are updates in cases. Again, I do like to cover a lot of unsolved cases. Not always, but primarily. And that's because we knew that with advancements in technology for DNA testing and all kinds of things, and you just never know that one person who might be listening, whose memory can be jogged, or who realized that maybe a fact that they know is a key detail in a case. So that's always very interesting to hear about, or to think about that maybe, it could jog a memory or something could happen. But either way, I say that we get into it. This case differs. Recently, we've done a lot of cases, BC, that were back in the 80s, I feel like. And when we talk about those types of cases, it's difficult because we don't have or did not have the technology then that we do now. So the Ring doorbell cameras, cell phones. I think sometimes we're remiss to remember how much cell phones have been helpful in solving cases and all the data that can be extracted from them, and even just geographically how we can ping locations and things like that. And in the 80s, we didn't have any of those capabilities. So all we had were like cars that just kind of were more reliable.
Pretty much. Yeah.
A little sturdier and more reliable. Appliances were more reliable. Outside of that, in terms of solving murders and missing cases, it was a little bit more difficult. But this case tonight takes place in the year 2011. So while we've had extreme advancements since that time in this year of now 2024, we at least had a lot to go off of then. And in fact, those are going to be some pertinent details to this case, some surveillance footage and some things like that. So let's dive on in. This is the case of a missing boy, and that's why I titled the show Murdered or Missing, because people are in different camps here as to what exactly happened to this child. And his name is Timmothy Pitzen. Again, this occurred in the year 2011. All right, guys. John, I would sit closer to the camera if I had the capability in the moment, but I don't. All right, guys, let's get started. Like I said, we're going to be talking about Timmothy Pitzen. So this case takes place in Illinois. All right. Timmothy Pitzen was born in Aurora, Illinois on October 18th of 2004. And so we're going to just go on. It's a pretty, a non-remarkable or unremarkable, meaning nothing to note that we know of in terms of his childhood. And so in 2011, the year in question, Timmothy was actually in kindergarten at Greenman Elementary School. So let's dive right in. On May 11th of 2011, We have Dad dropping Timothy off at school. So the night before, Mom and Dad are James, or he goes by Jim, and Amy. And the night before, Amy said she wasn't feeling that great. So Jim agreed to take Amy to work and little Timothy to school that next morning on the 12th. So he does just that. They all get in the Jeep, and Dad takes Timmy to school first. That's the first stop. Timmy hops out. He puts his Spider-Man backpack on. His dad tells him he loves him, to have a good day. Just the normal morning routine. And Timothy tells him he loves him right back, and he goes into school. He then takes Amy over to her work, which was not very far, a few blocks down from where little Timothy went to school there. So he goes on and drops Amy off at her job, and then he goes on to his work. So the normal day, the day starts just as usual. Nothing awry there. But that afternoon is when everything starts to unravel, because that afternoon, Jim goes to the school. He returns to Greenman Elementary School to pick up Timothy, but Timothy was not there. So he's confused by this, but not yet alarmed. And when he asks school, officials and teachers and whatnot where Timothy was, they say that, no, he's not been here all day. Like, he left at 8:30 this morning. Amy, his mom, checked him out and said that that there had been a family emergency and that they had to go. So Amy checked him out at 8:30 in the morning. This was not very long after, as in Amy must have been dropped off at work and almost immediately turned around and gone back to the school. So, of course, this alarms Jim in the sense that he doesn't know of any family emergency. Amy had not contacted him. He had no way, he didn't understand what was going on here. So there's a bit of confusion, as you can imagine, that kind of ensues this afternoon at the school. And finally, Jim decides to go on home. He does so because he and Amy had been a little shaky. Their marriage had kind of been on and off the rocks in the months and even honestly years prior. While it looked at the time like things were starting to get back on track, I think there were some other problems that maybe other family members and friends didn't quite know about. So he almost chalked this up to just like I think she probably needed a little space and took off, grabbed him and left. We don't get into the details of how odd behavior that would be, or why would she pick up the son without telling him, even if she needed her own space. But either way, that's what happened. So Jim goes home and just kind of sits and waits. Honestly, at this point, he did call family members just to make sure that there wasn't an emergency he had not heard about while he was at work. No one seems to understand what he's talking about. They had not heard from Amy. They didn't seem to think, they didn't know any more than he did. So now they're starting to have a bit of alarm as well. But no one had heard from Amy by this time. So let's go back and talk just a little bit about Amy and Jim to give you to set the scene a little bit in terms of their relationship, what their marriage looked like. They met in 2002 and got married in 2004. This was actually Amy's fourth marriage. She did open up to Jim about her history, her mental health history. She had quite a history of depression and kind of some different episodes. Evidently, she had attempted suicide on more than one occasion prior to meeting Jim, and then at least once that we know of during her marriage to Jim. So she tells him that the first time she actually parked her car on train tracks, but at the last minute she drove away, that she kind of couldn't go through with it. She ultimately, at that point, checked herself voluntarily into a psych ward. She spent about a week there and was prescribed some medication, and she did attend counseling at that time. The second attempt on her life actually was after she met Jim. So evidently, while she was driving, this is per Amy's account, she was overcome with what she called a hopeless feeling. She could not shake this. So she has this hopeless feeling and severe crippling anxiety. She pulled over and sat on the edge of a very tall embankment. Jim got a call actually that afternoon from a hospital in Cedar Rapids. Evidently, Amy had taken multiple sleeping pills and fell. She had gone to this embankment and she fell about 30 feet down the side of this embankment. She fractured some vertebrae. She had hypothermia from being exposed to the elements. And Jim says later that when Amy took her meds, she could be okay. But if she didn't, she would, quote, act real funny, big highs and lows. So what does that sound like to you guys? I'm going to go with it sounds like we got some BPD or some bipolar depression going on. She does talk about her depressive feelings. And when he talks about highs and lows, we can look at potentially like a bipolar type situation. We don't have a diagnosis for Amy, so I can't say that in full certainty, but a lot of things do point to that type of behavior. And she did not like to take her medication, which can also be, that can kind of be across the board with a lot of mental health issues, but definitely I think with bipolar disorder, oftentimes that is something that goes on with patients, that they don't particularly want to take these medications. She had been prescribed Ativan for her anxiety, and she was prescribed Wellbutrin and Lexapro for her depression. So she had these 3 prescriptions there at the house. Her sister did know about her behavior and her mental health struggles. All her sister ever really said was that they, quote, did not have an easy family life growing up. She was not specific on what that means, on what went on maybe with mom and dad or anything like that. She did state that her sister Amy, and their brother all struggled a bit differently as the years went on. Again, she was not specific as to what they were struggling with or potentially why. Okay, so we will talk a little bit about her sister as well, because her sister is still very active in these investigations. She's active in interviews. She's pretty much open. She's an open book, and she's open to be on any kind of interview, answer any kind of questions. She still wants, obviously, this mystery to be solved. And so we'll talk a little bit more about her as the time goes on. But eventually, Amy does get pregnant. At first, everything was fine. She would take little Timothy to parks and zoos and whatnot, just for your very typical new mom. But Amy's sister, Kara, says that soon enough, Amy's depression starts to trickle back in. We don't know either if she has complications or had complications from any kind of PPD or like a postpartum depression on top of, because we already know that she had, she was going to be predisposed to anxiety and depression. If she was or was not taking her meds, probably not, some of them, at least during her pregnancy. And then afterward, that's something just to consider after the baby was born, because like I said, her sister said that pretty soon after little Timothy was born, these depressive episodes started kicking back in. So then major problems start to arise. Evidently, Jim and Amy's marriage really started getting on shaky ground. Their fighting got to be more and more constant. Jim then finds out that Amy's been texting one of her ex-husbands. So I don't know about you guys, but that's kind of a no-go. I would call that a reason for a stern conversation. Yeah. So she'd been texting an ex-husband. They get into an argument about it, and he essentially, the words even from Jim is kind of like he made her choose between him and this other guy, her ex. So we're beyond just your typical evening fight after work, I guess, if you would. So he tells, during this particular time of argument about the ex-husband, he tells Amy that essentially, like, if they get a divorce, he's going to get full custody of little Timothy. And he is able to kind of use that, which I don't blame him for using whatever he, I guess, wants to say at the time, but he uses that to kind of force her hand or tempt her into staying. They do get over this hump eventually. They move it right along. One day, Amy came home early from work and said that she didn't feel well. And that was the day leading up to May 11th, on May 10th, the day before this whole school event, and them her picking up Timothy early goes on. So she had actually gotten a ride home that day, the day before the 11th, from work. And that was her kind of way of saying that she didn't feel well, that she had someone drive her home from work. So meaning now that her car is already stationed, if you will, at her job. So when Jim takes them to school and then subsequently Amy to work the next morning, her car's already at her job. Okay. So it's not like he dropped her off and she's without wheels. So the morning that he last saw Timothy, Amy was in the passenger seat of the Jeep, like I said. Timothy got out. Everything else was completely normal. We do know that she would have almost, like I said, immediately have to have gotten her car after she was dropped off at work if you look at this timeline, because per the school log, actually, I said 8:30. It's specifically between 8:15 and 8:25 is what the school says in terms of when Amy picked little Timothy up. So as he's waiting that afternoon, as Jim is waiting, he hasn't been able to pick up his son from school. He doesn't know where in the world Amy and Timothy are. Her family doesn't know where anyone is. He calls Amy's phone over and over and over. He leaves multiple messages, but Amy never, ever answers. She never responds. She never texts, nothing. So that night, Jim goes to the Aurora Police Department. He decides to go on and file a missing persons report. He really just kind of couldn't sit on his thumbs any longer at the house and wait for them. So he files this missing persons report. They said they'd need to give it a little more time. And I think this is understandable because she is a custodial parent and she can take, she doesn't need Jim's permission to take him and go anywhere, right? Would this be typical for you?
Yeah.
Or,
I mean,
in your experience?
Well, and the year sometimes depends. You know, years ago when people would say, well, I don't really want to waste the police, their time, but I want to file a missing persons report. The main thing is when you file it, you just talk about whatever break in behavior there is.
Okay.
So if my daily routine is to go to work and I'm there by 8:00 and I'm always on time and I leave at 4:00, but all of a sudden, for whatever reason, there's a break in that behavior and I never showed up at 8:00, no phone activity, whatever. So as long as there's like a break in the daily pattern that's articulatable, then usually police will then start to dig in. I'm not saying that they will refuse and do like in the movies and say you got to wait 24 hours,
right?
But you may have an officer or somebody say, well, just like you said,
let's take a look.
Yeah,
let's wait
they're with a parent
hours.
or whatever. Yeah, but you're not really tying up a whole lot of police resources early on, as long as there's no exact proof or evidence or any indications of imminent danger.
Right.
So if it's just a break in the daily behavior, usually an officer starts to dig in, follow up with work. Maybe they'll ask a front desk, that sort of thing. Right.
So, when we talked about I should agree, that's a prime example. Because in the I should agree case, it's a little girl. You can go back and listen to it. It's a quite an interesting case. It's also unsolved. She's missing, I think, more likely presumed murdered in that case, unfortunately. But go back and listen to it if you haven't. Either way, in the I should agree case, she goes to bed one night. When the mom wakes up in the morning, the family's getting ready for school and work, and Asha's not in the bed. They can't find her anywhere. That is completely out of the pattern that would be typical. And she's a little girl, and it was an overnight occurrence, not in her home, unable to be located, and not with an adult that we know of, not with a parent, not with someone she knows. So that immediately called in all the resources. So that gives you a little idea as to the difference and why they would kind of go about responding in a different kind of way. But here again, Timothy was with his mother. There was no huge cause, at least from the police department's perspective, for alarm just yet. So they decided to kind of sit on it for a little while, come back if nothing changes. If you hear of anything else, Jim, that's what they tell him. But Jim goes home, and now he becomes very alarmed because he notices that Amy's bottles of medication, in fact, were at home in the medicine cabinet. So not only, not only is she away without her medication, and now it's been, into the evening hours. And I think it might've been the next day that Jim finds this out. So potentially, 24 hours without medication. He also looks at these bottles and realizes that not only did she not take them with her, she had not been taking them at all. They were almost completely full, if not completely full. So she has not been medicated. And he's already said, per his own admission, that when she did not take her meds, it could get pretty severe. And her highs and lows could be pretty severe. So that's very telling. So obviously that causes him great alarm at this point. So the next day, or this would be on the 12th, authorities come to Jim. They decide, okay, let's go on and proceed in the search. Like, this isn't looking good. It's been a whole night now. Let's figure out some answers. So what we do know on that morning in question is that Amy, dropped her vehicle off at a repair shop at 10 a.m. Okay. So she checks little Timothy out of school between 8:15 and 8:25 a.m. She then takes her vehicle to a repair shop at 10 a.m. I hear differing accounts of if it was something like an under the hood issue or a tire issue. Either way, it doesn't much matter. Drops it there, or it could actually. An employee of that shop drives Amy and Timothy to the Brookfield Zoo. I don't feel like this is outside of the ordinary. I've had, it depends, especially if it's a little old auto body shop.
Mm-hmm.
People are kind and helpful if they're not like overrun with business in the moment. Where do you need to be somewhere while you wait? Yeah, just drop us off at the zoo. We'll spend our time there while you work on my car. So they do that. I've done that. I've dropped my car off and gotten an Uber with the kids to like Target.
Yeah. Why not?
Why not, right? So
go spend $200 at Target.
Why not? So they retrieve their vehicle. They get a ride back from the zoo at some point. We don't know who from it. This is also not much that matters, but Amy and Timothy get back from the zoo to the vehicle repair shop around 3 p.m. on May 11th. They now get in the car and they drive to the Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurney. Here they spend the night. Now we have them on surveillance footage. So we have pictures, and I'll put them on Instagram at Andréa Up Late. We have pictures of Amy and Timothy walking through the hotel corridors. We have pictures of them and video, like still pictures and video shots of them at the check-in desk. Timothy kind of walking around. He's got that Spider-Man backpack on his back, and Amy will be checking in at the front desk there. So like I said at the start of the show, the way that technology can be so important that we didn't used to have and we have now, is this case is a great example of that. While it's still unsolved, we have at least so many more pinpointed whereabouts that we would not have very likely otherwise. Okay. So they go to like I said, it was the Key Lime Cove Resort. She and Timothy are both there on that camera footage. They spend the night. So now it's May 12th. So on May 12th, the two of them drive to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. I believe this is about 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken, from where they had started or where they just had been at the other resort. Okay, so this is like Fun Day Express. So they go to the zoo, then to this one fun water park resort, spend the night, get in the car, drive a couple hours, and go to another one. Think Great Wolf Lodge. Something along those lines, okay? So now they're at this Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. They were spotted there again on security footage in the checkout line at 10 a.m. the next day, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So there they are, 10 a.m. in the checkout line. They're both on the security footage, and that will be the last time that we see anything of Timothy, okay? So that's the last time Timothy's whereabouts are documented via video or picture at least. All right. Oh, it just creeps me out every time I think about this case. All right. So between 12 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. on May 13th. So keep in mind, just a little bit in your head, it was May 11th, the day that Timothy went to school and Amy checked him out. That was on May 11th. Zoo, first resort. Spend the night. It's the 12th. They go to they're at the other resort now. Spend the night. Now it's the 13th. Okay. So they've been gone 2 nights from home. So between 12 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. on May 13th, Amy telephones several of her family members. This would include her mother, her brother-in-law. She tells them that Timothy and she and Timothy were safe. They weren't in any danger. Because as you can imagine, they've got to be starting to get worried sick now. But she says they're fine. Cell phone records do indicate that the calls were made from an area northwest of Sterling, Illinois. And this is going to be near Route, I believe that says near Route 40, if you are familiar with that area. During one of the calls, this would have been after they checked out. So the last time he's seen physically on camera would have been at that last resort they were at, like the morning that they checked out. This is later that day. And like I said, she made multiple phone calls. So at least on one of the calls, I believe it's with the brother-in-law, but either way, don't hold me to that. Someone did hear Timothy in the background saying that he was hungry or he wanted something to eat. But he didn't seem in distress. Nothing seemed wrong. He wasn't crying or upset. He's just with his mom. He's been to the zoo and 2 resorts now. He's probably very happy, and he's probably very hungry, because I don't know about you guys, but if you have kids, they are never not hungry, and particularly after swimming for a couple of days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my. Always eating. So, but like I said, this was not a cause for alarm, because actually it probably calms some nerves. They're able to hear from her. She seems okay. She says Timothy's okay. He's wanting a snack in the back seat, so everything seemed to be kind of on the up and up there. Excuse me. So at 7:25 p.m. on the 13th, so Timothy is last seen by video footage that morning. That midday, he's heard on the phone to say that he's hungry, and now it's that night, 2 nights after they've left home. So Amy was seen at the Family Dollar store in Winnebago, Illinois, and she purchased a pen, notepaper, and envelopes. She is seen alone. Timothy is not seen with her. So sometime between, let's say, 12 and 3 that afternoon, when she had made those phone calls, and now 7:25 at night, Timothy is now not with her on the security footage. Again, she gets a pen, notepaper, and envelopes. Then about half an hour later at 8 p.m., she's sighted at a Sullivan's food store in Winnebago. Again, Timothy is not on this footage as well. So it's not like he just, or maybe you could argue that he was just in the car, sleeping or something. But either way, he wasn't on the security footage at either one of these places. So at 11:15 p.m., she checks herself into the Rockford Inn at Rockford, Illinois, and she checks in alone. So per their video footage and accounts of the hotel staff there, she was alone. There was not a child with her. So even if you want to argue that potentially Timothy was in the backseat at the Family Dollar and at the Sullivan's food store, asleep or something like that, she did not bring him in from the car, if, had he been in it, to go to this Rockford Inn. So on May 14th, now we're on to the whole next day, at around 12:30 p.m., a maid opens the door. It's time for checkout, and a maid comes to the door and knocks. No one answers, and she's able to get in, even though the indoor latch was shut. So we've talked about these latches before, the one that has like the bolt on one side and then the swinging latch on the other that like hooks, so you can open the door usually 2 or 3 inches, and that's as far as it'll budge. We've also talked about in the Ellen Greenberg case specifically, people think that if you have it locked from the inside like that, there's no way anyone can intrude from the outside, and that's false. Those are easy to get into. And so either way, it had been latched, so apparently from the inside, and a maid has just stumbles upon a horrible scene. There's blood everywhere, and she finds Amy's body lying on the floor there right inside her own hotel room. Amy had slit each one of her wrists. Well, I say Amy, it's later determined to have been self-inflicted. Both of her wrists are slit, and her throat is slit. So we've talked about this before, about the presence of multiple wounds, be it however they occurred to your body, in a suicide. I think it's much more likely that would be in a case of a knife wound. Between the two of us have discussed the idea of multiple gunshot wounds in suicides, which can make investigating that case very hairy, very difficult, because it's going to, on first pass, obviously it's going to look like murder, and you have to kind of weed through and figure out how that occurred. But I mean, in any of the experience that you have, you guys, if you're not familiar, B.C. Sanders is a retired homicide lieutenant. So that's another reason he's a great example, or a great tool for this.
I've been called a tool for many years.
His brain is a great tool for the show, because he can offer a wonderful insight after many years investigating homicides. But sometimes that means that you can first be called to a suicide because people don't know yet that that's exactly what that is. So do you have any experience that you want to talk about in terms of suicide by knife, if there could be multiple wounds?
Yeah, there can always be multiple wounds. There can be And when you're dealing with anyone that's having any kind of crisis or a psychosis, then you can actually see multiple wounds self-inflicted that are vicious. But because of the mental state, then
right,
then it's possible. This sounds like, and without seeing crime scene photos or anything, but if you're saying that you've got lacerations on the wrist or the inner wrist and then the throat, sometimes people believe, if you cut a wrist that now you can't use your hands or anything. And I think that comes from the movies. But yes, people have cut their own throats. They've hit the jugular. Now you can research these things. So often when people commit suicide, there's research already on their computer or their smartphones in methods to commit suicide and painless ways and that sort of thing. So it's not unheard of that she committed suicide or completed. We say completed suicide.
Yeah.
But there's nothing far-fetched, I don't think, at that level yet on that.
Correct. Sorry, I was thinking about verbiage. They do later find, meaning investigators, a box cutter under the bed there in the hotel room that was believed to have been the weapon that she used to complete her suicide. So in looking at this scene we've got here with her there in the hotel room, we find that Timothy is nowhere to be found. So first and foremost, that's our most important detail. They've been gone for a few days. At that time, you've got to understand, Jim doesn't know all these details I just gave you. He doesn't know that they were at this resort and then this resort. This comes after with the investigation. So they've just been gone 2 or 3 days as far as he's concerned. Then he gets a phone call that his wife has been found dead in her hotel room. And they realize that there's no Timothy. So his first question, of course, is when he learns of the shock of his dead wife is then, where's Timothy? He's nowhere to be found. Also missing were Timothy's Spider-Man backpack that we saw him wear. So it's not like he left it at school and he got picked up. He had it with him at the resort that he was seen at. His clothes. Amy had purchased him some toys at one of their stops between resorts. We have some footage of that as well. Those toys were gone. And Amy's iPass and her cell phone. Now the iPass, think about a toll bridge, guys, or like a toll road. And so a lot of times if you have to travel a toll road often or, for work, let's say routinely, you can go on and pay for the iPass if you're not familiar. And so every time you drive, you can just kind of scan your pass and not have to stop and pay change or, cash every single time. So her iPass was gone, which would give very detailed geographic location. Timothy's backpack, Timothy's clothes and toys, her iPass, and her cell phone were all gone from the scene. And like I said, including Timothy himself. So we know that when she called, at some point she had told Jim's brother, interestingly enough, that that Timothy was her son and that she could do what she wanted to with him. So there in the hotel room, there was a note next to Amy's body. And in the note, she basically goes into kind of her specific feelings on how she feels bad to the maid. So the first part of the note is actually an apology to whoever finds her about the scene that they will be finding. So the days that followed Amy's death, 2 letters arrive in the mail. Keep in mind, when she was making these phone calls to family and stuff on May 13th, she never ever called Jim. So he never heard from her during this time, just some other family members. But 2 letters arrive in the days following her death. One goes to her mother and one goes to her friend. She did not mail any letters to her husband. In these letters, she talks about being sorry that she did this, but she said that she felt like she did not feel like she, quote, ever belonged in the world. And I felt for a long time that I belonged with Timothy, but in the end, that wasn't even enough and I need to go. So it does sound like she, at some point, Timothy was kind of a ray for her, maybe a reason for trying to continue. We know that she had had multiple attempts on her life leading up to Timothy's birth. And so maybe she thought that having him around would, I don't know, solve that for her, or be enough for her to then. And so she says in her own admission in those letters that in the end, that was not even enough. She wrote to her mother, quote, "I've taken him somewhere safe. He will be well cared for, and he says that he loves you. Please know that there is nothing that you could have said or done that would have changed my mind." What would be your first, in investigating this situation, what do you think would, you hear the mom gets this letter a couple days later in the mail. Mm-hmm. What do you think your first, sorts of thoughts might be?
Well, obviously, when you're talking to the mother, you just find out, would this be normal behavior? Obviously not. And then who does she trust the most to raise this child from age 6?
Correct.
For the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. And then you just start from there. Okay. Because you are kind of going into a mode of, if she's committed suicide, but the child's not with her, and she's writing a letter that says he's taken care of, that sort of thing, then you would have to assume, okay, now he's missing. Now you're going into missing person mode. Probably also making sure that when you're investigating the suicide, that you can articulate if it is in fact suicide and not, a murder staged to look like a suicide, that sort of thing. Because one of the first red flags for people would probably be, well, she never contacted her husband. She never wrote him a letter.
Correct.
All those things. So we don't have to get sidetracked with that. You just start nailing down who her closest associates are and any other family members. And then look through those and actually look for people who, one, have the capability to raise the child. Mm-hmm. And then two, who honestly would do that. That's a huge task.
So we're going to get, we will talk about that. You're exactly right. That really narrows down, I think, some options there. So investigators start to, as you can imagine, put together the pieces of this puzzle. They start to, track her movements, really try to get a picture of what these last 72 hours looked like from the time that Timothy was picked up from school that morning until her body was found and he was ultimately determined missing. So they actually pieced together a 500-mile journey that she had taken Timothy on. Evidently, they covered 6 counties through Illinois and Wisconsin, making some stops here and there, like we just pointed out a moment ago. We know whatever happened to Timothy pretty much almost certainly had to have happened in the hours that followed those calls between 12 and 3 that day on the 13th. But we know that immediately now, after she hung up the phone, was calling some relatives, she wound up turning her phone off and drove south along Rock River to Sterling, Illinois. This is per the Chicago Magazine. Did a huge write-up on this at the time and then soon after. So she had turned her phone off, and drove south along Rock River to Sterling, Illinois. This was like a steel town, like a small manufacturing town, a lot of farmland around it. She then drives about 80 miles, and that place is about 80 miles west of Aurora, if you're familiar with this spot on the map. So her family to this day will say they have no idea why she went there. She was not known to be in these areas for any reason. They didn't know people out there. She didn't have friends or family that lived in this area. But evidently that's where she went. So her iPass history. So we talked about that little card, right? That gets her through toll roads. When I said that it was missing from the hotel, they're still able to track its history. So they do, and they find that little card shows that months earlier, I believe it was actually February and March of that year. This occurred in May. Mm-hmm. So only 2 or 3 months earlier. Amy had made 2 trips to that same Sterling area, which she never told Jim or any other family member about. Mm-hmm. So where we have her card tracking on during the time that Timothy goes missing and then her body is found, after self-inflicted wounds in this hotel room, during that little 72-hour fun time that they had with the resorts and things like that, she'd also kind of gone out of her way to these other areas that evidently she had visited twice before, just a couple of months prior. Okay. This is a mystery for the family to this day. Her sister, like I said, she's open and talkative about this case in interviews and magazines and whatnot. And she will continue to say, we don't know what that was. We don't know why she took that drive. We don't know who lives out there. And we certainly don't know why she visited those areas twice prior to this. But her going out there is one of the things that the investigators consider a solid lead, albeit they have few of them. This is one thing that they're honing in on, as you can imagine.
Well, yeah, it would sound like or indicate that she scouted it out. You know what I mean? Like had to know about the area and then went ahead as a rehearsal or whatever, or like that. Is there someone off the radar that she knows who lives out there?
Right. So after like a few hours go by from that time, and that's when it gets into the little stops that I told you about earlier, right? About how at 8 p.m. she went to that Solo Ben's Foods, and then she had gone to that Dollar General, et cetera, et cetera. So let's see, where's our new stuff? So we have her car. That's another thing. Her car was not right there, but we found on May 14th, excuse me, in a parking lot, her car, it was a 2004 Ford Expedition, was found in a parking lot on May 14th. So this would be the same day that her body was found. The police said that this vehicle was, quote, visibly dirty. It had tall grass and weeds underneath the body of the car. Now we have talked, in fact, I believe we just talked on the Dorothy Scott case last week about how there are different classes on this, but we know that there are experts who can look at sediment and vegetation and things like this to determine things, exactly what they would want to know with this car. Where has it been? And they can exclude or include things that you wouldn't even think to make note of. And it can make all the difference in the world when you're trying to pin down where a vehicle has been. And I say vehicle because that's what we're talking about in this specific case, but it can be the bottom of your boots. It can be sediment under your fingernails, you name it. But police do say that technicians found, quote, a concerning amount of blood in the back seat of her car. And this did belong to Timothy. But his family will say that he suffered from very frequent nosebleeds. Some people will get hung up on the words concerning amount of blood. I can fall either way on this one because I have not seen it. That's not a picture we have. So I don't know how much blood they're talking. However, I have seen some children with nosebleeds that would make people pass out if they, couldn't see blood. So some kids will get horrific nosebleeds that last for a long time. And if you're in the backseat of the car without, for some reason, napkins or something to clean it up, it could look like a crime scene without, no jokes about it. It really, really, really could. So I don't necessarily get too hung up on that if we didn't know that he had this predisposition for frequent bloody noses.
Yeah, I think that because of circumstance, any amount of blood is going to be concerning. But that's also someone's description, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, because then someone's going to say, even if it's a small, whatever, 2 inch.
I definitely think it's something to take note of.
Yeah.
But I think that if we didn't know that he suffered from nosebleeds, it would be even a bigger item.
Yeah.
Right? Would you say, or am I wrong?
No.
I'm not the investigator.
No, not wrong. No, that's what I'm saying. It's like any amount of blood. I mean, someone can get shot in a car and begin to start to leak, it's begin to start to drop blood. And she may only find a very small amount of blood, maybe on the floorboard or on the near the door. But then you get outside of the car 5 feet away,
gotcha,
and there's a liter or two on the,
Yeah.
So that's the only reason I said, when someone says concerning amount in a report or
subjective. Yeah. So based on, we know the brother-in-law's account of the cell phone call that was made where they hear Timothy in the background saying that he was hungry. Based on that call and like that time of day, police were able to kind of conclude that Timothy and his mom at least were still together At probably in the last place would have been the I-88 and I-39 corridors of the Dixon, Rock Falls, Sterling area. This call was made about 5 miles northwest of Sterling, Illinois, near Route 40 is what the police say. So if you're familiar with that area, that would be the last place that they think Timothy was probably with his mother. It wasn't long after this that I told you she turned her phone off and continued on her journey, okay? Mm-hmm. So we know that she took 2 trips per her iPass records, like I said, to that area in the winter that the family members can't explain. One was on February 18th and the other was on March 20th. Again, this took place May 11th through the 14th. We'll talk a little bit about some time went by before they get some forensic results back in the car. So once they were able to process this evidence from her car that was found, they find sediment. I'm going to read it word for word here. And this is actually from the Aurora, Illinois Police Department statement. So it can get a little dry, but it's interesting to know because this is going to tell us a little, kind of give us a little more puzzle pieces to this mystery. We know that sediment and plant material on the vehicle, quote, again, from Illinois, the Aurora Police Department, indicate that it was stopped for an unknown period of time on a wide gravel shoulder, gravel road, or short gravel turnout. We know that it was adjacent to or just off of an asphalt secondary road that had at one time been treated with glass road marking beads. So this is the specifics, guys, that I'm talking about that they can do with this knowledge and technology, and I find it completely interesting. So in close proximity, per the Aurora PD, to the gravel shoulder or road where the vehicle stopped, it backed into a grassy meadow or field to a spot that is nearly treeless. Okay. There are birch and oak trees in the general area, but not directly over or at the spot where the SUV stopped. Both Queen Anne's lace, that's a weed, and black mustard plants grow in a row along the border of the field or the shoulder of the road. So you can take that information, and now there could be a good chunk of area. We know this was a manufacturing area surrounded by farmland and rural. So actually a lot of this, what we just read, could apply to probably a lot of areas around there. It wasn't necessarily super specific to one area, but it does give us a clue. It will rule out a lot of things as well. And I do find it interesting that we know that the car was backed into this area.
Why or how do you think they figured out backed into? You're talking about they're examining the vehicle, correct?
Would it be is that rhetorical, or are you asking me to tell you what I think?
Oh, I don't know nothing about processing tires.
Oh, well,
I'm just curious when you're saying it. I'm like,
my
okay.
My thought would be the way the vegetation lies underneath it, the direction it's going in.
That was what I was thinking
the car.
Too. It is interesting, and I
because it would be like the top of the vegetation would be face forward under the car, right? Because it's being, right? No.
In other words, like if I'm backing a car up and I'm catching vegetation and it's pulling under the chassis, or
the way it's caught under that car.
So then, that's the only reason I say that is it's interesting when they note small things like that, because once you get into an interview room, if everything that your evidence is indicating, your crime scene, everything, and you start talking to someone and you paint the picture of you're driving the vehicle, you're backing in, you may even describe, if you know the scene where she's backing in, but all you have is this information, but you start painting a picture mentally during the interview of backing in, and now the person's going to assume you know a lot more.
Well, that's
about the
a good
crime
point.
Itself.
In this situation, obviously, we have no one to ask because she's dead.
Right.
But
so scratch all that, bro.
No. That's a great idea, though. I mean, not a great idea. That's a great thought to point out for when it does come to interview time. In this situation, though, with her being dead, they need all the details they can get, and they're not going to get them from her, right? They're not going to get them from anyone that we know of so far. So the thought of her going to this area now the third time, when no one in her family knows that she's ever visited this area, this time with her child who immediately after goes missing, and she's backed into a weedy, grassy area, sounds suspect. It's not something you're going to generally do. You might, if you are going the wrong way down a road and you want to turn around, you might back into grass and turn around, but not to the degree that it's going to pull vegetation up and throw it under your car like that and keep it in there.
Yeah.
Are we looking in opposite directions?
No.
Hang on. I'm reading.
Wait, why did
we
happen?
are. Oh, we are, because I didn't switch it around this time. If you're thank you, Carly.
Wow, I didn't even pick up on that.
So remember we switched it last time because I wasn't on the left, like on the screen.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. So when I'm talking to you, I
do that. Okay, that actually looks better.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carly. Again, you guys, if you're listening, if you were listening to this as a podcast, which it is, like I said, we also are a live YouTube channel, and a friend of ours in the chats just mentioned that we look like we are turning completely away from each other. Evidently, we've done that for an hour now. So
if you watch it and you just turn the volume down, it looks like we're in an argument. Like we just cannot agree on anything.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So that's what we know about the evidence, the forensic results from that car. We also know, in addition to this, that there would be no corn growing in or adjacent to the spot where the SUV stopped. Now, that's important because there was a lot of farmland around. Now, I don't know the crops that they were specific to grow there in that part of Illinois, but we do know that no corn could have been growing adjacent to where the SUV stopped. We also know that there was no indication that the area had been used or worked for agriculture in the recent past. They're going to find that because they're going to look for certain nitrates and minerals and things like that would naturally occur after growing, like farming, like crops in that sense. So it wasn't on farmland. Instead, evidence strongly suggests that grasses have been the only major plants growing in this immediate area, which leads scientists to believe that it's a meadow and not, for instance, a field that had once been farmland. Forensic results indicate that the grass was not cut. So that lets you know it's probably not someone's backyard, right? Yeah. The grass had not been cut, which rules out residential lawn or a park. There's a strong likelihood that there is a pond, a small stream, or a creek in the area. So we don't know if they searched those bodies of water yet or not. I would assume if they know this evidence, they know that the car was likely near a small stream or a pond. They probably did. I hate to say probably, but they seem like they worked this case pretty well, and turned over every stone. So we know that the last time anyone had contact with Timmothy was on May 13th, like I said, when he talked to Amy's brother-in-law on the phone around 1:30 p.m. that day. And that call was traced to a point about 5 miles west of Sterling, Illinois, near Route 40, like we've said. It's super bizarro. We know that this is interesting to me. So it wasn't until 2013, so 2 years later, that Amy's phone was found. A passerby, I think maybe a jogger, it goes back and forth as to the verbiage of who it is that found it, was found located beside Route 78. Evidently, phone extractions and discovery and these kinds of things didn't bring up anything new for them that they didn't already know. We already knew about the phone calls that family members had talked about, and it sounds like this was consistent with that.
What year would that have been?
When her phone was found?
When it was found.
2013, so that was 2 years after this all took place.
Gotcha. All right.
The phone was discovered, quote, alongside the road on Illinois Route 78, north of Mount Carroll, Illinois, according to the police. I think I have another. Oh, yeah. So then, developments. This is where it gets a little interesting. At some point, there was like a 9-year-old boy that was found that briefly was like, a little hope that this could be Timmothy. Turns out it was not, in fact, Timmothy whatsoever. But on April 3rd, 2019, so now we're looking at 8 years, almost exactly 8 years later, the family has, at this point, not given up hope by any stretch of the imagination, but 8 years have gone by. A woman in Newport, Kentucky, so this is just like across the Ohio River from Cincinnati, okay, spotted like a skinny young man who looked like he could be probably a variety of ages. She wasn't quite sure yet, but he was small and he was skinny. He looked bruised. And he was seemingly agitated, pacing at an intersection, kind of head down, big coat on, these kinds of things. She will say later in an interview that, quote, he walked up to my car and he said, "Can you help me?" He then said, "I just want to get home. Please help me." He goes on to tell this woman that he has been passed from person to person to person, like many males, and that he had been sexually abused. He had been kidnapped and sexually abused for a long time, and that this string of individuals had taken him and kind of had their way with him and held him essentially hostage until this point, and that he was able to get away. But of course, authorities, she calls 911. She had seen a photo progression that had been done of Timothy Pitzen. And so she thought this guy strongly to be him because he told her he was him. Authorities get there. He said, "My name is Timothy Pitzen." He tells authorities the same thing he had told this lady about having been kidnapped and the sex ring and all this stuff. If you can imagine, I mean, news just spread like wildfire. All the news outlets picked it up. The town explodes with this information. It's one where it's like they never said for sure this was him while they were processing his DNA, but they kind of alluded to that it was. And news reporters start kind of saying, "We think this is missing Timothy Pitzen." Like, it just gets hope in everybody's ears. Talk about putting the cart before the horse, which I know he said he was, but oh my goodness. So it goes on through all these news outlets. They wait all day for the results of the DNA test. We got Jim, the dad, right? Kara is Amy's sister. They are just ecstatic, but hesitantly so, right? They can't even imagine this after all these years. Kara, Timothy's aunt, says that she, quote, completely got her hopes up. She thought it was real 100%. She said, "It didn't even occur to me that it would not be him. I was thinking things like, who's going to pick him up? Does he need clothes?" She said she was packing her things to drive there. I mean, horrible, horrible, horrible. The dad, Jim, said that he tried to keep his expectations tempered. But how do you, yeah. You can tell yourself that, but also I'm sure that every bit of him is just beaming and hoping so. But either way, they make the 5-hour drive to Newport. Authorities that had worked this case get there. Everybody's very curious and excited. But they didn't run his. So here's the thing: they would have gotten fingerprint results back quicker. They didn't run his fingerprints, and Jim actually asks about that. Like, why haven't you just run his prints? And they say that this guy refused to cooperate. The guy who says that he's Timothy. So they did a buccal swab, I believe, like a cheek swab to get his DNA. Ultimately speaking, guys, it was not by any means Timothy. It was some dude who I would assume is a little mental himself, who later said that he had seen the news about Timothy and that he wanted to be him and wanted to. I mean, it just gets crazier and crazier. He was charged with, I believe it's called, would it be aggravated? Is that a thing? Aggravated identity theft or something like that? It was. I feel like that's what it sounded like, the charge. It was an interesting way to word it.
Yeah, I mean, each state's got their own law, so there probably is something like that that's a little more severe, or maybe, I don't know. I'm completely speculating.
Yeah. We can look at statistics. We were talking about the term of that earlier. It's filicide. Filicide is the term given for when a parent kills their child. That can go all over the place. I'm not going to bore you guys with all of that right this moment. I might throw some facts up on the Instagram post about this later. But I will say that it is so incredibly rare if a mother murders her child. There are age ranges and things like that make it more common than others. But it is incredibly rare that a mother would murder her child and then go somewhere else to commit suicide. In the cases where a mother commits a murder-suicide with her child, it is almost always in the same location.
Mhm.
And I wonder, there could be psychology behind that as well, that she wants to be near the child, that, who knows, but we do know that to be true. Let's see here. Anyway, this is a wild case. I have some questions myself about this that I can't find answers to. I jotted down my notes about it earlier when you were talking, BC. Are you just going to look? Actually, let me just go on and change this right now. And you guys are going to
you're going to move me
lose
over?
your minds. Yeah, because now I'm going to be on the right. Maybe. Did it do it? Now we can. Is that better, y'all? Does that make more sense?
Yes.
Much better. So the notes that I jotted down were, I would like to know, first of all, had she gotten into a paranoid realm? Because she says to the mom in that letter that Timothy is now somewhere safe. Now, we've heard people say that, and ultimately that person was dead. We have had people lose their minds and say that someone is safe now, and that's because they've killed them. But is she getting paranoid about the dad? Is she didn't remember, she never communicated with him. She never phone called him. She never wrote a letter to him. And he had threatened before that he would get total custody of Timothy in the event that they got a divorce. And, I think that is one example. I mean, I have to lay it on the table, even though I'm not necessarily going down that route. I just want to say that one example of a reason that a mother commits filicide or kills her child, or a father, these are in different categories as to why people do it. One of the categories is specifically so the other parent won't have that child. That does often take place in during a custody battle or divorce case, but that's just something to note. You had your hand up.
I'm like a kid. Now I forgot.
I was saying
no, now I remember. Because early on, if her thing was staying because she was worried she would lose custody of her child, then it seems like she knows she's going to commit suicide. I mean, it seems like there's some indicators there. So then if she's worried about her son or her, husband having sole custody of him, I think that just what it could potentially look like is that she had taken him somewhere, killed him, gone back, and actually committed suicide. And just like you said, maybe, this is all speculation, by the way, I'm just saying.
Yeah, we have no idea.
But the letter saying that he's in a safe place, like you've said, people have done that in the past where it's now I know nothing bad.
I've controlled this environment. He's safe.
It sounds...
And he's not with the one person I don't want him to be with, which in this case would be his father.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was one of my questions. I also want to know, I don't know yet, or I've not been able to find, if she had reservations at these resorts. So, like, had she called 2 weeks prior to make reservations?
Great point. For all the planning. Yeah, that's a lot to take in one actual day. Period. So it's almost like if you're in a heightened...
500 miles.
Yeah. So if you're in a I guess what used to be called manic state, but an excited state.
Sure.
You're spending money, you're doing things.
Traveling.
In a very sometimes fun or exciting way. So, and impulsive. So it could be that she's not planning any of that, moving on impulse. But at some point she went to that location twice before, in February and March. Right? So,
which we will talk about that.
Yeah.
That's super weird to me. Well, it's not weird. It certainly gives you the planning aspect. So we'll talk about that. But, and one thing I want to know is, and I can't find reports of this anywhere, nor do I know that they checked her for this because they quickly realized this was self-inflicted, her wounds. Did she have any of Timothy's DNA on her? Which I guess, because you can pull out and specify whether or not it's blood DNA, correct? Versus different types of DNA, right? So, I guess I'm thinking, if she had hurt him, if there was blood in the car because of a wound that he incurred, would she then have his? She could easily have his DNA on her because he's her son and
Right.
she's
You're
around
saying,
him.
could
But like
she have
his blood. Like I guess
Yeah.
not DNA then. Maybe if they tested for blood, but then why would they test for the blood
Yeah.
when would you test the blood in that sense?
I think you would, and
because
I'm not
he's missing.
Yeah, because he's missing, because you don't have the other party, and you find the car at some point, and the car has blood in it, so you could assume, that his blood could be on her, and you have arterial spray and things like that. So if someone's far enough away, they can get mist on their clothing that may not be visible to. Just the naked eye.
I got
Sorry.
So you could
trying to make us like do something here.
You could do that, yes. And that's also, like we've talked about in some of the previous episodes, you hold a crime scene for as long as you need to.
Okay.
So if you're dealing with a missing child and she's committed suicide, that's a crime scene in the sense of it gives you potential leads to find him. So if you were processing something like that, and then you find additional blood in a vehicle, and then you say, okay, here we've got, blood in the vehicle. Let's also check her entire clothing, her body, everything, to see if we in fact have, any kind of traces of blood on her body, or even in the location, the dwelling, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
If in fact
like in that motel room.
If you have someone who commits a murder and then tries to clean up some blood or other fluids, you can process for that. I don't know. It's just the more you were talking about it and explaining it, and the vehicle and the two locations prior to, I don't know. I mean, obviously we don't have everything in the case, but my gut with that would
I got everything.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Nobody ever asks you what you think. I'm always over here just a yapping.
Well, those are the big questions I think I have with it.
Mm-hmm.
I go back and forth. So I will say, so some of the theories, if people don't believe that she killed him, would be, there are a few different ones, potentially an estranged family member, but we have no record of that, like no account of that. No family has come forward to say that there would be family estranged, I'm kind of ruling that out. One of the theories is that he's out of the country, that like someone took him out of the country, and that's why we've heard, hide nor hair of him.
Yeah. I like to interrupt you.
That's
ahead. Good, but that should surface somewhere in your victimology, somewhere in your family and associates, any ties to another country. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean someone can't, snatch him up and they live in America for a month or two and then go to Canada or go to Mexico or somewhere very easy where they.
Well, I think that would be, if for the people in that camp, I think that's what they think, is that she gave him over to someone knowing they knew what they were getting by getting Timothy. Like this wasn't a surprise or a kidnapping or anything like that, with the intention of them taking him away.
Yeah.
So that he wouldn't be found. That one to me is less likely. There's quite a wide range of people. There's an Amish community not too far out from there. And there's a good bit of people, when you read ideas here, that speculate that she potentially gave Timothy away to a member of that Amish community, and with the idea of, with the false pretense that he was unsafe at home or that his father would harm him, and she needs to escape and she can't do it with him, whatever, make up whatever story you want. We know that people make up stories all the time involving children. And so that she said something like that, and that they took him in. Essentially, she might have left him with them, and they took him in thinking they were loving and whatever. And the reason that people believe that is because, or at least the people that do believe that, are in the camp that the Amish is just so disconnected and they wouldn't see the news reports. Are you guys on Amish TikTok? First of all, if you haven't found that algorithm, I suggest you do so right when the show is over.
I've never heard of that.
Second of all, And they're getting a little spicy, a little sassy, and getting some TikTok. But to be honest though, and to be realistic here, the Amish are not cut off the way that people want to speculate. They don't live under rocks. Just because they don't have proclivities for electricity doesn't mean that they don't know what's going on. Okay. In fact, they probably know more of what's going on than a lot of us do because we've got our heads in screens and they have word of mouth. So,
our heads in the screen right now.
It's true. Our heads in like all the screens. But you know what I mean? So I don't think that, I don't, if someone from the Amish community has him, it's not because they are so isolated that they would just never, they have to go into town for stuff, guys. They would see posters, they would hear, like, come on.
I also don't, again, this could be someone creating in their head, they can just hand them off to the Amish, like,
and then that idea just travels.
Like you would have to have, like, I would say if you wanted to go down that kind of path in an investigation, you don't just, come up with it. It could be something in that victimology or associates that where someone says, yes, she knows people in the Amish community, or but now you're banking on an Amish family saying, oh, that's cool.
And everyone in the community keeping their mouth shut about this new kid.
Yeah. And we'll just take care of the kid and we won't worry about where his father is and what his father thinks or grandparents or family.
So another thought is that the thought that people have contrary to that. So the converse thought that she gave him away would be that obviously she murdered him. Mm-hmm. But if she gave him away, he's 6. Mm-hmm. He's not 2.
Right.
He knows his given name. He knows his birth date. He knows, so then these would be people who say, that think he's alive, that it could potentially be like a JC Dugard situation. That, what was it, 18 years later she was found? Is that right?
I confuse
you guys fact check me in there. Many years later, she could, like, that old guy and his wife had taken her, remember, and she's able to get away ultimately, like, many moons later.
Okay.
And, or is that Elizabeth Smart? I get them all mixed up. But either way, my point is someone living with someone else for a long time. Because at this point, that was 2011. This is 13 years. So he'd be 19, 20 years old at this point. Mm-hmm. And crazier things have happened that, that he could come forward. But either way, there's retraining of the brain. There's all the things. There's keeping him hidden until he doesn't call himself Timothy any longer, if that would be the case. Mm-hmm. I go back and forth on this. The first time I covered this, I think I felt conflicted the same because I can start to have a working theory, and then the more we talk about it, the more my brain goes down so many other tunnels, and I get, but I don't know. I just, unless she gave him to someone who murdered him, and that sounds terrible, but but like knowing that they were going to, or like that was the plan.
Yeah. That would be a tough one too.
It's a tough one, but it's also makes more sense that his body's not been found if he's dead, meaning that, because otherwise she would have a big job to do to be able to murder him and fully dispose of his body and then go to the hotel and commit suicide.
I did jot down a note or 7 over here.
Okay, what you got?
The only thing I would be curious about, did I understand you right that she had tried to commit suicide before and there was something about an embankment and going down an embankment of some sort?
That what now?
She tried to commit suicide.
Yeah, she had.
Some kind of embankment or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I would be interested in that area that you would want to go back, depending on how large the embankment is or anything like that.
Well, we'd have to figure out. So in the reports about that, all that is Jim stating that she at some point had given her, past struggles with mental health history to him, and kind of explained that, there was a time I did this. Actually, excuse me, that time is when they were still married. I don't know where that falls on her track of car, like on this map of these 72 hours.
The reason I say that is if somebody goes to a location and everything is true and accurate, that they tried to commit suicide.
Okay.
At that location, going off of an embankment or something like that, I would have to assume it was steep enough for them to think that they could kill themselves. Also, that if someone else went off that embankment, that they would die.
Correct.
So I guess what I'm saying is it would be interesting to focus on or see an embankment, an area like that, where if this is out in the woods, if this is off of a path or off of a road that most people travel, she drives out there, backs up, sadly, pushes a kid off of an embankment, and that kid dies and is now in low ground. And, you potentially have animals, that sort of thing. And then, decomposition begins to occur. The child will never be found. There are people that die often in the woods or in the parks and are never found. So I don't know. I just made a note of that I thought there was something said about her going off of an embankment. But I was jotting notes quickly. But
no, it's a great point. But again, I don't know. We'd have to see exactly where that was because I don't know where that falls in relation to where she was during all of this.
Yeah.
Because she kind of started driving away quickly. Actually, no. I don't believe so because I believe that was closer to where they actually lived, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And we know that he was last seen at least a couple of hours away on that footage.
Gotcha.
So it sounds like it's more in the area of whatever happened that she had clearly planned in the sense of she'd planned to go back there because she'd been to this area outside of Sterling twice in the months prior, a third time this day. And we have it because we have her iPass and her information of her car tracking. So we know where Timothy was last heard on the phone. So they were able to pinpoint, triangulate that location. And that would have been in that area that she had visited. So why did she visit that area? Who lives there? Or who had she planned to meet there? This was a steel or a manufacturing town. So, and there were plants. There are ways to dispose of a body. Mills and things and silo. You know what I mean? So it's...
Yeah, I don't know. But
do you lean more toward murder? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very possible, we know it, that someone can grow up, held in captivity for that long. I don't know. I just feel like with this one, because if that's the case that she hands him off to somebody, it would have to be somebody that she already knows. And she would have to have some kind of decent rapport with them. And so I think that would show up in the victimology and the associates.
They would have to be a loner or introduce now more people to be a part of this plot.
Right.
That in all these years would never speak, or even if they learn about it and they hear a story that's not true about how they obtain this child now in their family through adoption or whatever, they make something up. This was all over the news. They're going to see this child's face. You know what I mean? So somebody would find that out. So that just doesn't.
So that's why I say that I think, if someone is held in captivity for a decade or more, I would assume they're often taken by a stranger or someone who is now holding them, So the difference here is that you don't have a stranger kidnapping, this child. You have a parent simply saying, he's safe now and that sort of thing. Our first thing is to think, well, when a child's safe, that means someone nice is taking care of them. You brought up a good point about any kind of psychosis or critical state or that sort of thing. Now you're looking at safe meaning, or a better place meaning not this world right now, or not this life.
This world was already not good for her, right? So in her brain, she wanted to leave this world. She was going to feel better and feel safer somewhere else. So
so I don't know. That's after we're talking about now. I just kind of lean towards that. But
yeah, I do as well. I will say none of his family does, and I don't think it's because they've got blind hope. I think that they really, they will all say to this day, even her husband, that there's no matter what all has happened and what went on, that she would have never done this to him. And I think it's because it's incomprehensible. If there hadn't been any prior abuse or anything like that, you can't get your brain around the fact that a mother could do this. And so
Well, and again, so part of that victimology would be that when someone says, "Hey, there's no way she would do that," and enough people say that, and you look at it, it does cause you to understand. Okay, well, maybe they didn't. Maybe they didn't do that. We believe. I mean, I say we that she committed suicide because there was a past history of that, and then of course you work your crime scene. But I mean, the only reason I was saying that I felt that way was because of that, because of the situation. It just seems, and I know maybe she wasn't acting, logical, or she had bouts of being erratic, but if she was so worried about losing custody to, her husband, then it's one of those things like to then kill herself, but leave, her child with someone. You're still taking that chance. If he's found, now he's going to his father. Cause that's his father.
And it makes sense too that why would her phone be turned off and thrown out? You know what I mean? Unless this is when he got disposed of, or this is when something happened. Now my phone's gone. Now I'm going, there was just so much planning at every turn, be it the long drive with the 2 resorts. So even if that was sporadic or on the, on the cuff, you've got her going to the store to buy envelopes and paper and pens so she can pen these letters.
Is that better?
Now you're like tiny.
Yeah, now my chin is the rest right now.
Hey, Marine's blood. There's just planning at every point, and her throwing that phone and having visited that spot twice prior. That is, on board with the investigators on that part where they say, like, this is one of our few solid leads, but they obviously consider that to be a big deal. And it makes sense when we find her car in that parking lot. Not only did the iPass, little car swiper thing indicate that's where she had been, but the vegetation, everything lines up with that when they ran that forensics on her car. So
same thing. It's like, that normal path, that normal behavior. Now you've got a vehicle going off the pavement, doing things that potentially could be murder, could be, dumping something.
Yeah, dumping.
Yeah. Or you can back in anywhere, but usually that's what people do. So
you guys, if you've been listening to this, hit the like button, but also chime in on the chats. Let us know what you're thinking. As always, tomorrow I will put all the pictures from this case up on my Instagram page on Andréa Up Late, and with a little narrative to explain some things. But this case doesn't get any more bizarre. I do think, now that I'm saying it, I'm not sure if I had this conclusion the first time I went over it, but being the type of like industrial manufacturing, rural, small town it was, it could be, if she scouted out this area a couple times, that she found a place to dispose of him. When I think of like mills and plants and, I hate to say it, but like vats with chemicals and things, you know what I mean? So,
and I asked earlier about the phone, and what year that was, just because as years go on and technology gets better for phone extraction,
like the ability of extraction.
Yeah, you can do very, very
2013.
Yeah. So you could probably, and I don't, like I said, the technology changes so much, but it also gets better and better. And there's always that battle of a new phone's out. What information can you extract from it? And it can get, depending on what program, it can get very, very detailed. So even if it's 2013, I don't know, but it could be that they, when I say they, people in that field go back and do a newer, updated phone extraction, which I'm sure they're doing. It's not like I'm saying they aren't doing it. But if you do that, you may come up with more information.
True.
And so it's one of those things where potentially, locations or
it's
anything,
worth it to keep working it too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's that, guys. Bye. No, I think that wraps it up, though, for tonight for that case. But what you been doing? You got anything you want to tell everybody about?
Yes. I posted some of the slots for Chicago gangs. And it's basically Chicago gangs that have spread. So when I say Chicago, a lot of people go, I don't live in Chicago. I don't need to know about those gangs. I mean in origin. So they're all over the East Coast, Southeast, Midwest. So I posted some pictures, but I've got slots up for those. I'm doing Those classes are virtual. All you got to do is direct message me on Instagram, and I'll put you on the schedule, send you the link the day of. You pay the $50, and it's a very small cap in the class.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that way we can ask and talk and go over the information and get in depth with it. And that's for citizens and law enforcement. So there have been a lot of citizens who've been asking. I want to say citizens like people like me, like I'm retired now, so I would be able to take a class like this because I'm not sworn anymore.
Yeah, I think that's where some people's confusion
Yeah.
lies. It's so you might develop a bit of a different class for law enforcement, and then civilians can take the class as well.
Yeah. And I've got one on white pride gangs coming up. So I've been explaining to some people most of today on Instagram and DMs about what I mean, the evolution of it, going from the Klan, Nazis, their symbolism, into the order, into Hammerskins, and into the modern or current version of some of the street gangs that mimic or look very similar to Bloods and Crips, but operate in that realm using like the number 14 and lightning bolts and symbols and things of that nature. So those classes are coming up. And I've also got a buddy of mine that I used to work homicide with, who's very well known in the field. He's been in a book. He's worked cold cases. And he's actually going to be doing very similar things on the homicide realm, doing like 2-hour blocks and stuff. So if people are listening and they're interested in taking some courses like that, and then all it is a link, you don't have to go anywhere. We're not traveling. We're doing it all virtual. You can hit me at thedisruptors.bc.ski, and that's SKI, at Gmail. And then you don't have to worry about social media. Just use the old Gmail account.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the t-shirt's up for sale too. Just posted
t-shirts.
today.
So go to Minor League Studios and you can find the merch. I'm just going to pretend like I'm going to get t-shirts out there every week and tell you that they'll be ready next week, because that's evidently what I've been doing. Hey, James. Hey, Carly. Hey, John. Hey, Marines. We appreciate you guys for stopping in again. Thank you for listening. And this show airs live every Tuesday on the Andréa Up Late YouTube channel at 8/7 Central. I'm often joined by BC Sanders, and we drop tomorrow wherever you stream your podcast. So you can follow me on Andréa Up Late on Instagram. Same with BC Sanders at that same name. We've got a comment from John in the chat that says, "Can sovereign citizens sign up for your class, BC?"
This guy.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Sign up, John.
You don't need your license to sign up for the class, so you should be fine.
Yeah.
I would imagine, right? Oh, goodness. Well, we really appreciate you guys, and subscribers are growing slowly but surely. It's steadily crawling uphill, but it's working. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. You wrote Hust.
I can't type.
Please do so, and I would totally appreciate it. And it's free, y'all. So let's do that. But you know what? Until next week, we'll be back here hanging out and thinking of some crazy case. What is that face?
Huh?
What?
No. Yeah, we'll be thinking about some stuff.
All right, that sounds good. So until then, we will see y'all next Tuesday.